As Ghana's coronavirus infections hit the 1,000 mark, questions are being asked. Was it a wise decision to lift the lockdown? People are mistrusting the data. But why? Again, Ghanaians are being asked to wear masks. It is said to be compulsory. But how does the police, or do the police, enforce an advice? We will also tell you the very revealing, disturbing details of bribery when Ghana needed a power plant in court documents in the US. What will the state do beyond accepting the resignation of the man charged with bribery in excess of $4 million? We'll be right back to deal with the vexed matters. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini. You're welcome back once again to NewsFile. This is your most authoritative news analysis platform. I'm your host, Samson Ladi Anyanini. And here's my take. I title it, Corona Chaos. Wear a mask. Police don't enforce advice. It is strange that people are disobeying the president's advice and encouragement to all to wear a mask. It is strange because it is intended for our protection as individuals and a society. Except the unconstitutional and illegal aspects of one of the EIs I have complained about, our individual and collective protection against getting infected with the dreaded COVID-19 is the chief purpose of all other measures in the 7 executive instruments issued since Ghana recorded its first infections. Not long after the outbreak, it was discovered that wearing a nose mask is one very effective protection against transmitting or inhaling droplets or aerosols from sneezing and coughing. It was not surprising then that the president passionately advocated wearing masks when he lifted the measured lockdown. Even those who felt it was too early and a dangerous gamble seemed to console themselves in the fact that wearing the mask when you are leaving home is a major layer of protection. But Monday, the first day of implementation of the good advice, the media reported people were not wearing the mask. Police in Kumasi had a difficult time trying to enforce the advice. I wear my mask and do everything to protect myself and others. I don't need a law or police to compel me to do so. Yes, it is a matter of common sense. But I observe others endanger my life by not wearing the masks. Unfortunately, the police can only enforce law, not advice or common sense. They are already endangering themselves, and the least we must do is to empower them to enforce the wearing of the mask. Realizing the widespread non-compliance with the advice, the Accra Region Security Council issued a circular commanding mandatory wearing of masks. But that is not good enough until the command has the full force of law behind it. Mr. President, as you know, the coronavirus pandemic is a major public health crisis, and we know the front door to spreading it. Those risking their lives risk ours too. Parliament passed the Imposition of Restrictions Act 2020, Act 1210, empowering you to, by the stroke of your pen, issue certain orders and instructions we disobey at the pain of arrest, detention, and prosecution, leading to hefty fines and/or prison terms. The law mandates you to impose restrictions reasonable and necessary for public safety and public health. The cases are rising, and we are no longer forced to stay home. Please act swiftly or instruct the district assemblies to make the legally enforceable bylaws to compel wearing of the mask, regardless that sanctions through bylaws are far less severe. A fine of up to only 2,400 or so, and or not more than 6 months in jail. But first, the education ought to be increased and the masks supply by the state. Mr. President, you said that there will be guidance by the medical fraternity on what to do with the mask, how to wear it. We're waiting for that. In Kaduna State, it is not only being added to the legally enforceable mandatory quarantine measures like in Senegal, but free supply of masks as well. People may not apply common sense. They may be ignorant. The state has a sacred duty to protect them by forcing them to protect themselves during this coronavirus pandemic. Truth is, nobody should be given the discretion to enforce common law or common sense against you. Human beings will always abuse discretion, and that's why we make laws, so both the civilian and police know exactly what is being enforced. We could actually not need voters register or a voter's card, but common sense on election day, you know. We could drive without traffic regulations, you know. Thank you. This is my take this morning. And as you know, for those of you who follow us by way of our advertisements of our guests to come on the show this morning, we are happy that Bright Simmons and Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh have been generous enough to agree to join us today to continue with the discussion we had last week. Bright Simmons is board member, Africa Population and Health Research Center. Of course, you know him to be with Imani as well. Good morning and welcome to NewsFile, Bright.
Thank you.
Joining us on for a virtual interaction is Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director of the CDD Ghana. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Great, and I'm excited. The sound quality on your Zoom this morning is great. Also joining us is Professor Abraham Kwabena Annan, who is Director NMIMR. But we will first deal with the question of the 4.5 million bribery scandal that has forced the Tema oil refinery boss to exit. We asking, will the state follow the money? Literally, will the state do anything beyond accepting a resignation? We will have a second segment, and then we will deal extensively with the matters arising with the lockdown being lifted and the questions of mistrust in the data that is being churned out as far as the coronavirus is concerned. All right. So, like I said, Professor Abraham Kwabena Annan is director at Noguchi, and so he will join us and help us understand matters better. Right. Now, let's get to ask Bright Simmons. Now, I have spent quite some time reading the over 30 pages of the court documents that give such graphic detail that suggests to you that there is some unimpeachable evidence about this bribery scandal. It speaks about email, correspondences that it obviously has intercepted. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has intercepted, and details by dates, by hours and minutes, what happened from the start 2015 to even sometime in 2017. And the question being asked now is, the chief executive of the Tema Oil Refinery tendered his resignation. Mr. Beko, Asante Beko, tendered his resignation. The president said, I have accepted your resignation. So questions are being asked, is that the end of the story? But what does your reading of the court documents tell you about what went on when we were in an emergency situation and we needed power plants?
No, you're absolutely right, Samson. It reads like a Jeffrey Archer novel. That's completely fascinating. So sometime around 2012, Goldman Sachs, which is a massive investment bank, I think $1 trillion in assets, very powerful organization, bought shares in a company called AXA Energy, and therefore became, I think it was a minority holding of around 16%, if my memory serves me right. And therefore they became very involved in trying to find business for their portfolio company.
Right.
Around 2013, the power crisis in Ghana started to deepen, and by 2014, a strategy had been adopted by the government of the day to implement what then became known as the emergency power policy. And the idea was that we're going to look for fast-track energy projects, and that would typically mean modular energy plants. So this would be energy plants that are effective in responding to emergency needs for power. So you could literally bring them, a power plant in a box, they are often called, install them quickly, and then be able to provide power. So Goldman got wind of this, and this being Ghana, they started to look for a Ghana specialist in their team. The person who came up was Mr. Beko, who was then practicing in London as an investment banker for Goldman. And London is one of the major centers of Goldman activity worldwide. I think 20% or more of global revenue derives from London, if not more. So they approached Mr. Beko, or rather they instructed Mr. Beko, given that he was the employee, and then said to him that he should make efforts to get AXA into Ghana, because they had already discussed it with AXA, and AXA was very keen on deploying their power plants in Ghana. At that time, margins in Turkey were under huge pressure, and so AXA was looking for any opportunity to increase their margins. Mr. Beko then, according to the allegations, and as you've rightly pointed out, those allegations are very strongly backed by evidence. And the reason is that Mr. Beko, for some fascinating reason, together with other principals in this affair, decided to commit almost everything that they were doing to writing. And I think the view that he had was that so long as he used his personal email address, it would be impervious to audit.
Right.
So he kept saying that, only my Gmail, forgetting that, Gmail is owned by an American company, and by, since the Patriot Act days, all of this information is generally transparent.
But what he did then, according to the court documents, was a violation of his own company's regulations.
Which was why he did not want to use his official email address.
Because if he had used his official email address, it will be audited from time to time.
Periodic audit, indeed.
Right. Okay.
Indeed. So when the decision was made then to enter Ghana in 2015, Mr. Beko decided to use a consulting company. And one of the fascinating things about this affair is how, till date, investigative journalists in this country have not been able to unearth this consulting company. A lot of us have ideas of which company it might be, but we will keep it under wraps now for obvious legal reasons. So this consulting company had links to the government at the highest levels due to the presence, either on their board or their ownership, of what they describe as a politically exposed person.
Right.
So this person was a brother of a very senior government official. And Mr. Bekun decided to engage this company with AXA, obviously to his advice, because AXA will be relying on his country knowledge. And this entity was then responsible for fast-tracking and enabling the acquisition of the right agreements, the right licenses, etc.
Right.
Remember, though, that this was an emergency power situation. So a lot of the rules have been relaxed. A lot of the Energy Commission type rules and the likes have been compressed into single panel evaluations where multiple regulators sit around.
And that was for good reason.
For good reason.
Right.
The challenge, though, as you might wonder, is if the country itself had a policy to fast track, then why would you need another intermediary to fast track?
Okay.
That's a very important question. We'll go back to it.
So the consulting company you talk about is the entity that the court documents refer to as the intermediary.
Indeed.
And that also, and that also is against the company's policies to have for Bekun, who is alleged to have used that entity, particularly to channel bribes.
No, he should have disclosed it.
Right.
The challenge is not that this was against Goldman's policy to use consultants, but you need to disclose that. And unfortunately, he did not disclose the nature of the transactions that these people were involved with. And in repeated disclosures to the company authority, the company head, the company compliance department, he kept ignoring or neglecting to do so. So this intermediary company then set up...
the legal department flagged it and requested that it be investigated.
Indeed.
And then they got to know that, in fact, something like that had happened.
Indeed.
Right.
So this is around February. The intermediary company then sets up an SPV as part of the process of being able to receive money and deploy it with very minimal financial authorities oversight. So financial oversight in this country will struggle if you're using an SPV to wire money in. Not that it's completely opaque, but it makes it much more difficult.
Right.
Now, we know that sometime around May, things had come to a head in that, through a lot of effort, they managed to get the government to sign an emergency power agreement, a EPA. The bribes now start to flow. And there are a lot of smaller type bribes flying around, purportedly to the parliament, to officials in government, to the civil servants, etc.
Right.
But the most interesting was $3 million paid in the month of May.
Civil servants at the power ministry, at the electricity company.
The regulators, exactly. Then the utilities themselves.
Yes.
So essentially the people that are going to be buying the power themselves were being bribed to look the other way rather than to perform due diligence to make sure that whether it's UCG or Greek or whatever, it's not being shortchanged.
Right.
Then the money, so about $3 million then changed hands in 2 installments in May, because in May the power agreement was signed. And the government officials then committed to get this agreement before Parliament to get ratification. And the way that the arrangement with the intermediary company had been set out was that we pay you on milestone basis.
Correct.
So when you do this for us, we pay you. And there were about 4 critical milestones. Sign the agreement, send it to Parliament, issue a letter of credit, and issue a tax waiver for the equipment that we're going to bring in.
Right.
So these 4 elements were the key milestones upon which monies were to be released.
At each point where a milestone, had been achieved, money was paid. Right.
Mr. Bekun argues that that money was being paid for activities relevant to licensing and things like that because AXA did not have full financial infrastructure in Ghana. So this intermediary was responsible for more or less acting as their local agent and therefore making payments for all these kind of regulatory costs and the rest of it. The problem is that in the emergency power arrangements that were in place then, regulatory fees were very low for obvious reasons.
Right.
So it's very difficult to justify $3 million for regulatory activities. Land was being provided, by the government, and often it was even issues around title and things like that were already taken care of by. Remember the famous Ameri situation? Right. Government provided the land, then got a contractor to prepare the land, etc. So that claim is very difficult to sustain.
And that was corroborated by the CEO of the energy company, the Turkish energy company, that they had paid them in about 200 to 3 million, 200 to 300,000 US dollars for the regulatory compliance matters that they had done for them, and that they were not actually interested in using them, and they were ready to just give them a walk-away payment
that came
of
later.
about another $300,000.
That came much later. But in this period of May, the agreement had been signed. Parliament had to approve it, and to do that, about $3 million was required to facilitate that movement. Because remember, you had a politically exposed person between this intermediary and the government official.
Right.
And very often they would say that, we want to kick out the government official because it was being slow, and can you find somebody else? So the typical thing. And then the Ministry of Power then presented a memorandum to Parliament laying out the terms of the deal and why it was useful for Ghana at that point to ratify the deal. The problem, obviously, is that a lot of that information was not candid. And it's quite evident that if the Ministry of Power and other regulators were not being blinded by ulterior motives and other considerations, that should not have happened. Because they went there, and one of the most egregious things they did was to design a capital recovery charge that pretends as if the power plants were going to be built anew or they were going to be purchased anew. So when you look at the tariff dedicated to capital recovery, typically you do an internal rate of return analysis or a return on investment analysis and use that to determine what the tariff for capital recovery will be. In this case, these were second-hand plants that a company was going to amass and bring in. So a proper analysis will have depressed the capital recovery and saved Ghana money.
Right.
They refused to disclose that fact. They then made additional failures. There were then additional failures to disclose around the fact that this was an HFO plant, and if you do the full analysis properly, that the analysis that they had made regarding the comparative cost between the comparison of the cost between this particular plant and other plants that were also in the emergency category were all flawed, in the sense that we're not fully disclosing the facts.
Right.
Then you find out that they also, because the way that the energy demand, given the way that fuel cost pass through and the rest works, if you work it out clearly, it's not only the capacity charge you need to look at. You need to do an analysis of the energy charge to see if, given the way that the thing has been set up, the risk that the government is absorbing through letter of credit and all of those things, that would be the reasonable charge. That information was hidden from Parliament. Nobody in Parliament decided to delve into it, given the circumstances of the case. And it's very similar to the Mary problems that, you remember our organization was very much at the forefront. So once again, we come to this issue where data is usually manipulated to serve a political end. Very often with the connivance of all levels of government, Parliament, the civil service, etc., etc., etc. Long story short, AXA, because of these failures to disclose, manages to cheat Ghana a huge amount of money, out of a huge amount of money, so that it was willing, based on the negotiations, given the documents that we have now, to pay the intermediary at that point, at this early stage of the game. They were willing to pay the intermediary $42 million. You get me? They were willing to, and Goldman Sachs was expecting to earn $10 million.
Yes, 10 million.
And there were additional disbursements, this to facilitate other people, that was costing, that must have cost at least $5 million. And there was a fee for Mr. Beckon, which later on we will discover was about $2 million.
Right.
So in total, AXA was willing to spend $60 million on everything apart from building the power plant, because it was managed to get our officials to allow them to overcharge in the simplest terms possible. So the way that they designed the tariffs, by refusing to disclose information, they had inflated the tariff, which then enabled the power company to pay these bribes, because they are profitable, profit-making company, right? So the only way they're going to pay $60 million in various, whatever you call them, bribes, facilitation fees, whatever, is if whatever profit they were going to make is substantially more than $60 million. And so when you think about it, you realize three things. One is that due to these tendencies for private interest to supersede public interest, we end up overpaying in a lot of instances, in a lot of projects in these countries. And therefore, it is warranted that the citizenry and the citizens of Ghana continue to distrust public motive. You understand me? Because we've seen from event to event, whether it's Woyomi, whether it's this AXA matter, that when it comes to their private interest, public actors, whether it's in civil servants, government officials, whatever, will place their private interest above public interest. So we have to be very careful the things they tell us. So if the Ministry of Power will go to Parliament and present information that hides the full picture in order to create a much more profitable transaction for a private company from Turkey, then it's not so surprising then that when information is put out in the public domain by officials of government, we tend to be so suspicious. Then in July, Parliament ratifies this.
Okay. Now, just hold on. In July, Parliament ratifying that, and the people who are asking questions why we were not wearing the mask, particularly when I started by promoting the mask wearing. That is the reason when the president announced that the medical group will release guidelines on how to use the mask and when and where to use it. It is important that we have that, because many people do not have knowledge about when it is necessary to use the mask.
And now we are observing the 1 meter distance.
More than 1 meter. We have been told by professionals, health professionals, that for as long as we are doing a two-way, like I'm doing with Bright here, under this long stretch of a desk, we don't need a mask. So that's the reason we are not wearing a mask here. Right. Now, as you speak about the lack of disclosures, and we'll get to Professor Prempeh to look at, you know, he has a peculiar area of interest when it comes to these matters.
He always does.
And his very good friend, Professor Kwasari, has also been speaking about the fact that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has provided us a mounting of clues for law enforcement to quickly, you know, indict several highly placed people for receiving bribes in the AXA energy deal, and yet we don't seem to be doing anything.
And it goes without saying that Professor Prempeh's publications on governance and the rest goes back many years.
That's correct.
He's given us a consistent overview of these matters.
That's correct. Now, they discover also that beyond the lack of disclosure, between Asante Beko and the CEO of the Turkish company, when they ask the CEO, they make enquiries or they interrogate him on issues. He would do a draft for him Asante Beko, and Asante Beko will vet and revise, and you see the transformation between what he wants to communicate and what eventually Asante Beko does for him to communicate to the people.
That is a very important point, because as we progress, you see how that then unfolded.
Right.
So in July, Parliament approves this or ratifies this. The issue around the letter of credit and the tax waiver becomes subject to a whole range of problems. Remember, in the memorandum to Parliament, the Minister of Power assured the parliamentarians that per the agreement, if within 30 days the conditions present had not been met, they automatically waived. So that meant, therefore, that government was effectively relieved from its duties, its obligation to provide these other items that the company, the energy company, wanted. Government was effectively relieved. And I think there were people that were saying that, look, it was quite clear to everybody that wanted this as emergency power. If they cannot deliver in a few months as we had planned, then what's the point? And so if they're going to wait till everything else is sorted before they start acting, then they're not serious. But this started to create friction between the intermediaries and AXA. Eventually, it gets to the point where it is quite clear that Mr. Beko is acting not in the interest of Goldman. So there's a huge principal agent problem here.
Right.
Whereas an agent of Goldman, his loyalties appear to lie with AXA, which you've pointed out. Right. And then it gets to the head because it becomes quite clear that after the ratification of Parliament, the intermediaries might not be able to deliver. Right. So sometime around August of 2015, friction begins to develop between the what do you call it, the power company, AXA, and the consulting company in Ghana. And eventually decide to wrap things up by giving them, I think, $1 million and walk away. Now, Mr. Beko now starts to have issues with Goldman. I think there were now some whistleblowing activities going on and the rest of it. So Goldman starts to ask questions. He starts to enter into a very elaborate scheme not to be candid. And eventually,
to be candid at two levels.
Yes.
At the level of the intermediary, as in Goldman, and also the holding company that the company had set up. So there were two, the holding company with a committee that he was supposed to
That is Goldman's holding company in New York.
Exactly.
And then he works in Goldman London. But the way
as a subsidiary.
The way that the system works is that they have integrated teams across subsidiaries and in head office.
That's right.
And this was the nature of the arrangement.
Right. And so he evades all the two.
Yep.
And I say he evades on the basis of the evidence
that we
or the allegations contained in the suit by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission.
Which is an important point which we'll come to. It's a civil suit,
right?
Not a criminal. It's not criminal proceedings. So what happens then is that In March, Goldman launches official investigations, and AXA starts to collaborate gradually, start to provide some information. In May, AXA, despite the fact that Goldman has some voting rights on AXA's board, refuses to engage further on the matter. So in May, we're not going to cooperate anymore. In August, Goldman is like, we're out. We can't do this anymore.
Right.
In September, Mr. Beck continues to provide services to AXA in his own private capacity, even while employed by Goldman.
And eventually resigns.
Eventually resigns in December of 2016. And by February of 2017, he had secured the all-powerful letter of credit and tax waivers. Why did AXA need this? To make the transaction effectively risk-free. It's like, I'm not going to risk a dime here. I need a letter of credit for $100 million. I'm bringing you second-hand power plants, but I still need $100 million in a letter of credit. On top of that, I don't want to pay a single dime of tax. So I have zero risk.
Okay.
But I'm willing to pay money to get this zero risk, not to Ghana, to somebody else. In February 2017, Mr. Beck had achieved these milestones, these other milestones for them, and he gets his $2 million. Which brings three issues. In fact, I'm still continuing for the first three issues because I just pointed out two.
Right.
The third issue there was that given the fact that you had a situation where the power plant was not likely to be delivered on time, the nature of this emergency power appears purely to have been a ruse to exploit to make money. Essentially, you say it's emergency power, so remove all the hurdles and all the procurement rules and the rest of it. But it doesn't come in 3 months. It doesn't come by the end of 2015. In fact, it doesn't start operating till sometime in 2018, though they start making some light test runs and the rest in 2017. It's in 2018 that full operation starts, and it's that time that they get a tax waiver. But the commitments to the letter of credit and the tax waiver have been secured by February of 2017, in that the new government had committed to do that, and therefore Mr. Beck gets his $2 million. Now, what is problematic is that when Goldman saw that, they then alerted the SEC. It's possible that there were other whistleblowers, but all the evidence, and including what has been disclosed, suggests that Goldman then actively cooperated with the SEC, because this was an employee who was breaching every etiquette in the principal agent arrangement. It's a norm. And this is when the SEC started to investigate in March 2017. They reached out to Mr. Beck, he gave a statement, and then they went away and spent a lot of time reconstructing this whole episode. And by the time they were through, it was quite evident that the evidence for bribery was compelling. They decided then to go to the Eastern District, the U.S. court in the Eastern District in New York, and file a civil suit and disgorge Mr. Beck of all the money that he's made.
Right, that's the primary relief they are asking from the court. And then
any other ancillary reliefs.
Okay, so you hold on briefly for me. We'll return to you because we basically have presented the entire picture as far as the story is concerned. I'll return to you to emphasize why Ghana should be interested in pursuing this matter, and if there are any lessons to guide us in similar dealings in times like this. Right. Let me go to Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, and thank you once again for your patience. And I needed Bright to help me to take all of us through the details as much as we could to assist our viewers and listeners across the globe to appreciate this. Now, I'd like to know what your first impressions are after reading the 37-page, document put in the court. But in addition to that, this is what Professor Kweku Asare says, that the U.S. SEC has provided a mountain of clues for law enforcement to quickly indict several highly placed people for receiving bribes in the AXA energy deal. Further, the clues should be enough to not only cancel the $27 million tax waiver recently granted to AXA, but to revoke its registration document. Not surprisingly, this matter seems to be of no interest to law enforcement, Parliament, or even the media. Let's hear you, Professor Etukwesi Prempeh.
Well, I think, as you rightly said, Bright has, in this characteristically detailed manner, walked us through the structure of the transaction, both from a technical and a business angle. I would like to look at this from my, wearing my CDD governance hat, from a governance perspective.
Correct.
Right. That so when you put it in this larger context, it is clear that our international reputation for the integrity of the international contracts that we enter into it's been at stake for some time. We remember that we have had problems with judgment debts going way back, and it has not even stopped. Only yesterday, I happened to see a new arbitration, a new intent notice to take us to international arbitration by one of the companies, foreign companies in this country. We went through a process of trying to clean up that problem, that mess of international arbitration, judgment debts, and the like. All of them arising out of our international contracting relationships. I do not know what came out of that effort in the past. And now with Airbus and this one, we are now also added a reputation for corruption to our already sullen, in my view, sullen reputation for not basically keeping our word when it comes to international contracting. So the country's reputation actually, and for that matter, the brand, is at stake. And we ought to take this very seriously, because we cannot, on the one hand, go around the world drumming for business and for investment, and yet be seen as a country where either we do not honor our word when it comes to contracting, or that in order to do business here, you have to basically go through this kind of arrangement with intermediaries, dealing with politically exposed persons, and passing out bribes and the like. I think what this speaks to is that the framework, the regime that we have set up internally as a country in doing international contracting is broken. It's clearly broken. If you look at the 4 milestone areas, I mean, the 4 points where monies tend to pass, right? That Bright laid out. These processes are usually in our system led by political actors. Of course, with some of their, own, favorite bureaucrats or civil servants in tow, but these are led by political actors going out to make the deal, sometimes even bringing in the third party. Political actor has something to do with that. When the deal comes, going to negotiate the contract itself. Oftentimes, political actors lead these things. Then, after that has been done, the approval of the transaction, of course, by Parliament, is obviously a political forum. And then, of course, tax waivers, same process, right? So we have actually turned the entire contracting process from the front end to the back end over to political actors to lead, which exposes them, of course, to these kinds of corrupting influences. And it's clear that the intention, the original idea that parliamentary oversight would somehow discipline our international contracting process and inject some integrity into it is completely lost. That idea of the framers of the Constitution definitely has not come to pass. So there's a problem there. And so I think that for me, the real reason we need to take this not as an isolated case. It is not. It is not. The Airbus case is not. Basically, there is a systemic failure here. There is a problem with the way we are set up as a country to do business with the outside world, with too little independent review. I remember that for many years now, Dr. S.K.B. Asante, who is an international lawyer of repute, has served on exit arbitration panels, has done a lot of work at the UN level on transnational investments and the like, has been advocating an independent review process, right? An independent review process that where you have, some, experts or, contracting experts like to review some of the agreements that we make and at least render an opinion on it for the benefit of the political actors before they make decisions on these things. And it is clear to me that we really need to step back and look at this process we've given ourselves. It's not working. It's exposing the whole process to huge corruption risk and rigging. And it is costing the country inordinate amounts of money that we do not have to waste. It's not going to be solved by just moving people around, because I've said it's clearly a systemic failure here. It's not going to be solved by just changing one government, bringing that government, doing that and that. Clearly, we need to step back and look at it again and realize that it's not working. We all know, sometimes we pretend we don't know these things. We all know these things, right? That the processes that one has to go through to get these things passed. The executive goes to sign a deal, right? Sometimes they even conclude the deal. Basically, it's essentially sent to Parliament as a fait accompli. And that pressure then passed, because if you have already concluded a deal, essentially, and you are sending it for ratification, it's not supposed to be for ratification, right? You're actually supposed to, why don't we have a process where you don't conclude the deal? What Parliament does is not ratify. It actually is the one that gives the green light for you to proceed to complete the transaction, right? It's not ratification. Ratification means that it's a done deal and we are coming to give you retrospectively the appropriate authority that you did not have previously go into the deal. So we should stop thinking of Parliament's role as ratification. Parliament's role is an approval role, which we must see as a necessary, as you lawyers would say, as a condition precedent to actually even sometimes going ahead to finish the deal. Just you can send Parliament the term sheets and say, these are the key provisions of the deal. This is the draft. What do you say about it? But when you already conclude the deal, essentially, and then you use certificate of urgency or emergency, whatever they do in Parliament, to basically essentially just mobilize all the majority votes to vote for a deal, that's an abuse of the process. You're making mockery of the process. So the political class is essentially making mockery of the process that the framers of our Constitution wisely thought they had put in place to mitigate these kinds of risks. It's not working. We need to step back and probably get people like SKB Asante and look at his proposal of this independent review panel that goes through every one of these international agreements and contracts, and also do some value for money analysis. These are not, we almost behave sometimes as if we are alone in this kind of world. These deals are fairly commonplace. We can do price comparisons across country. We can check how deals like that are working elsewhere. But somehow, everything here is almost like, a brand new deal. It's like we are so insular, we don't even care to look at how this same kind of transaction
and that has gotten people
was executed.
That has gotten people very worried about what some label as the unnecessary third parties, intermediaries or consultants or agents.
But that is the structure of these deals, right? When you look at it, when you look at Airbus, this is standard operating procedure. This is the modus operandus. That's how these international bribery deals occur.
So people ask the question, Prof. People ask the question, Prof, and I want you to tell us if they are justified. That I employ you in the civil service, say in the power ministry, you have all these host of experts within the ministry. And yet, if you need to buy one small power-related item, you will ignore all these persons and expertise and go look for a third party to lead the process. Like we're in COVID-19 pandemic fight. We need to buy PPEs. you know that the Ministry of Health could simply check the prices and get a procurement process to buy. And yet, we will look for a third party who has some expertise in the areas, and often they don't, like in the Airbus matter, to lead the process. Are people justified in these concerns?
I think this is essentially a rhetorical question. I think you know the answer to the question. I mean, you have to ask yourself, why do we do things this way, right? Why must we structure these kinds of transactions this way? You know, why must we, for example, if we know we have a particular need, we know the kinds of contracts that we tend to enter into. I am a bit surprised that to date, we do not have like model agreements. A lot of the time, people who come here to contract bring the drafts of the contracts that they want to sign with us. They are the ones who bring the drafts, and we react to their drafts. And any lawyer, any transactional lawyer who has been in this business will tell you that whoever's draft you use, right, basically has an advantage over you. So we know, for example, that we are going to enter into power purchase agreements. We know we are going to enter. Why don't we, as a country, we have an Attorney General's department. Why haven't we our own model agreements that basically tell us the terms there? We ourselves have put them in there. So we know for every deal we have, this is what every one of those deals that we do, this is what we are looking to get as a country. We can vary it based on negotiation with the third party, the contracting party on the other side, but basically we have a frame or a structure of the agreement that we want. And then when you come to us with your proposal, we fit it into our model agreement. We do that. I mean, I think GMPC, I don't know if they still do that, but GMPC usually has some model agreements like that. We must have these almost across the board. In all the areas where we do repeat business, we as a country, led by our law firm, the Attorney General's Department, must craft agreements, model agreements, which represent the country's preferred position on these transactions. And of course, we should be willing to vary them based on negotiation with the other contracting parties, but we must go into these things with our own drafts, not responding to drafts brought by people, and then they have deal structures we may not even understand, and we won't consult. We won't consult experts. You know, experts have become a funny word here these days. But I think we have set ourselves up to fail, and to fail intentionally, because there is private profit to be made at the public expense. You know, all of the milestone points are high-risk corruption points in the point of signature, the point of parliament approval, the point of the waivers. All of these we know. We know these are open secrets in this country. We wait a scandal like this to come, then when we act as if we are surprised. But we know.
Like Professor Kwekwasari suggests, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission appears to be handing us some leads, at least, even though it does look more than mere leads. The question is, the state is able, on the basis of that evidence, perhaps also using the legal regime of the mutual legal assistance to procure the hardcore evidence, and on the basis of that, do its investigations and prosecute the various state officers, the government officials and other persons who have not been named here, to do a prosecution. Are you surprised that, unlike this case, unlike the Airbus situation, where within hours of the story breaking, the president, gave an order, a charge to the special prosecutor to proceed and investigate the matter, and in this one, nothing is heard?
Well, I mean, basically, when you look at, and what I'm surprised by is the fact that here we are, claim to be a country that is interested in fighting corruption and illicit flows of money from the south to the north. We make a lot of these noises about, exploitation of poor countries by, advanced nation business persons and all of that. And you have international, foreign investigative bodies who are using their own resources, right, to investigate these transactions that cost you money. It didn't really cost them money, right? This transaction did not cost the US a single dime. If anything, it may have gone to enrich Goldman Sachs and some other players. So these are international bodies who are enforcing their own laws essentially to your benefit. So I see the work they're doing as almost a subsidy. They are giving us almost like a subsidy. The SEC and the DOJ in the Airbus cases are essentially subsidizing our own very weak, investigative resources. So once we get, they provide us with evidence of this sort, because that's all we usually say. Where is the evidence? When you make an allegation, they tell you where it is. These guys have gathered substantial evidence, substantial pieces of evidence. All we have to do is connect the dots. We say, thank you for doing our work for us. We couldn't have done this. We really probably were not interested in doing this. But now that you've given it to us, the least we could do is follow through and get our own investigative and prosecutorial authorities then to basically do the, connect the dots, do the little internal bit we have to do, and follow through. Even that we are not willing to do. Whether or not the president authorizes, the president basically, given the nature of the independent prosecutor's office, the whole idea was that they would not act on the instruction of the president. I don't think you need even the president to tell the Office of Special Prosecutor that this is another case for you, right? This case follows along the same lines as the Airbus deal. Intermediary, government exposed person, government official, same kinds of structure, right? So obviously the precedent has been set.
Okay.
The OAS ought to take notice of this, and it's obvious that this falls within its remit. If the first one does, this one does too. So for me, it's not really a matter of, and I personally would not like a situation where the OSP's prosecutorial or investigative powers are triggered upon the say-so of the president. That was not the idea, right? So I would rather that did not even happen, that it would not take the president to say, Mr. OSP, investigate this. The OSP should know that this matter has come up, the evidence has been gathered, preliminary evidence has been gathered by a credible foreign body. The information is out there in the public domain. What are you waiting for? Just take it and basically work on it.
All right.
I think that we should get to a point where it does not take a precedent. I think the whole idea of the OSP would not even have come about if we respected the traditions of the AG's office historically.
Exactly.
The AG's office historically, it's not actually supposed to act. It's not actually the ruling party's lawyer. They are not supposed to investigate on pressure from presidents or from other political actors. They are the one member of the cabinet who actually have a separate constitutional authority that mandates them to do their work independently of control from political actors. They can be fired if you don't like what they're doing, then you take the political hit for firing them, but they are independent in the prosecution that they are doing. So if we take the traditions of this office historically, from the common law tradition, from Anglo-American tradition, we would not have needed even the OSP. And now that we have created the OSP, we shouldn't make it into another AG where they have to act because the president says
and very interesting views there, except that in this country you don't have a history or precedent of attorney generals acting in ways that lead the appointers, those who appoint them, to disappoint them. Very interesting situation, and the American situation you gave. Well, so I will return to Prof. On your final point to ask the question whether what you make of claims that are being made that by the political, divide, that this case is one that is being pursued in the court. It's not over. It is not like the Airbus one, which is already done, and we are reading judgment. So they are not on the same scale, and you cannot expect the government to act with the same level of swiftness. Even though the experts will say that even with the judgment, it is not the judgment that you are going to implement. You are going to do your own investigation. So I'll come to you on that. Now, Bright, I was asking the question earlier, what do you make of what Professor Kokwasari suggests, that we should cancel, we should take the tax waiver away, cancel, what did he say specifically? Let me get back to that point. I'll get to it. But I was asking, why should Ghana be pursuing this matter, and what lessons to guide us going forward? We have just a few minutes to conclude on this.
I think 4 quick points. One is that it's quite clear now that public officials, when you leave them too much discretion, they're unable to restrain themselves. So we need to find ways to limit that discretion. One way you could do that is to apply time bars for regulatory activities. So if I have a license application and you outline a number of steps that I need to take, and there are reviews, obviously, on the side of the public sector, you need to institute time bars and say, look, if it does not act, if within 2 weeks, a particular action has not been taken, then we can consider the condition waived and things like that. I think that kind of strict time barring might be very useful, given that a lot of the time people are paying to fast track things. They shouldn't be fast tracking. The system should be efficient enough. The second one is, in emergency situations such as we are in now, we understand that you need to relax on rules of procurement, but the way that you should then counterbalance the risk is to increase the amount of information disclosure. So you say, okay, we'll relax some rules, but we're going to put out even more information out in the public domain, so that when the emergency is over, people are much better.
Professor Sari says that we should cancel the $27 million tax waiver that was granted and revoke the registration of documents.
Two points on that in that respect. Like I said, it's a civil case now. Typically, the Department of Justice itself has the right to institute criminal proceedings parallel. That has not happened in this case yet. We have the right at this point in time, because it increases the leverage that the civil authorities in the US have. If we were to implement our own criminal investigation, and they'll be much more willing to cooperate because it helps their case. Last point, AXA is registered in this country, and AXA is making money in this country. It had a contract that was supposed to expire this year. From reading their own annual reports and the like, it appears as if that agreement has been extended. It's been extended in the same period that we are arguing that take-or-pay contracts, which have no strategic value in this country, need not continue. AXA's situation currently is untenable. The only strategic advantage that I saw in reviewing the documents is that they were providing HFO, or rather they were using HFO, which is part of, or rather is supportive of our fuel diversification strategy, which is we shouldn't have all the power plants either using LCO or gas, or we should have more diversity, so that if there is a supply chain shock, we can still continue to run our power plants. That HFO advantage has been overtaken by events, because car power is dual fuel. They can use both HFO and gas. Secondly, it's already operating at less than 30% capacity and charging us for full capacity because of these take and pay arrangements. What is the basis for continuing to maintain the AXA agreement? We need a clear explanation from government. And why are the agreements being extended?
Andrew Ejapa Mesa, you know him, is a member of parliament and a communications member of the governing party. He says there's one thing we must pay attention to, that when these tax waivers are brought to Parliament, they are brought on the basis of a contract that has already, been agreed upon. So to use the word by Professor Kokwasari, that tax waivers recently granted may not paint the accurate picture of things, because you have already committed the state to doing certain things, and the state goes ahead to do them. Let me take Professor H.K.C. Prempe's final words here, and I was asking whether or not there is any legal sense in suggesting that Airbus was a judgment. This one is not a judgment, and that is why there's no swift, action, if at any at all.
No, I don't. I think the question is correct. I mean, we have. And Bright too, what Bright is suggesting is that we don't have to wait on the U.S. authorities to complete either their civil case or to commence a criminal action, which usually follows. But they do these things, you know, they use all the tools at their disposal normally to get a lot of leverage over the, you know, the person who, over the defendant, so that if they want to settle, for example, if they want to disgorge the illicit money you have made, a civil suit looks like the ideal way to go, at least at first. And then if you cooperate, maybe they can bargain with you and say, okay, if you cooperate, we'll waive the criminal, we won't go criminal with you later on. You know, so in the US, they use all these tools just to get the most maximum leverage they want to. But I think that if indeed we can show that these contracts were procured corruptly or by fraud or in some way, yes, I mean, it's within our right to actually, basically undo the contract. Except that, obviously, in this case, who has clean hands here? I mean, our own representatives as a country who went into this contracting, it's not like basically we were hired by these people, right? It's not like a case where there's a unilateral, fraud against Ghana. We, our own representatives, are complicit in this. And I think this is where things like the law on causing financial loss to the state comes in. You know, if you look at the Cotton case, the Cotton was a case where we didn't even proceed against, the U.S. proceeded against the American citizen who was involved in the U.S. court. And then we went after our own citizens in our own local courts who were complicit in that transaction. After that case and that judgment by the late Justice Afre, it looks like the political class has gotten a bit of cold feet about that law. I haven't seen it very much spoken about, but this is the kind of law that's supposed to protect the public fisc. It's supposed to protect our treasury from kinds of deals where persons who are agents, who are supposed to represent our interests in these kinds of transactions, basically either look the other way or become complicit with third parties to dupe us. And that's where I think, so we ourselves are complicit somewhat in this.
In a minute, what will be your view on a suggestion by some member of parliament that they are interested, and they may be interested in a bipartisan, process to investigate this?
Nothing. I mean, if Parliament has the power to do this. Nobody basically, maybe they've never activated that power, but Parliament has power to actually take on a matter like this. It doesn't matter that they are indicted in this. Well, I don't know the particular individual players in this, but Parliament definitely, it is within Parliament's remit to actually call hearings into this matter. Parliament has put itself in all kinds of binds that it shouldn't be bound by. But if Parliament wants to do a hearing on this, it is absolutely within its rights to do it. Whether or not it's going to do it, and whether or not, in fact, the process in Parliament would even allow this to happen, right? Whether or not somebody is not going to play a gatekeeper role to stop all of this from happening, it's another matter.
But, your major interest is to have an institution like the OSP get into this and deal with it exhaustively.
At least after the fact, yes. But I think that basically going forward, we need to look at the structure of these deals and how we attend to them and how we conclude them and find some process. Right. Some process that basically is independent of the political actors. That some at least technical advice. Look at contracts, look at the whole transaction, and then grateful. Say this is a good one for us. That's very grateful, Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh. And Bright, what you are writing in a minute, render it and let's break here.
No, I think that the point that Prof made earlier on about the reputation of Ghana, we need to look at it. This is the second big Goldman Sachs-related scandal. You remember the Elias Prekomata, where someone held the Nigerian governor, Ganyan, at Goldman, helped the Nigerian governor to launder millions of pounds. And then when he was asked investigations, he later said he brought out money for politics in Ghana. So we really have to start watching this before all of us start getting blacklisted.
And I need to state that the individual involved here who has resigned issued a statement immediately the matter came up, even issued a statement before he resigned. And he said, among other things, confirming some of the details in the court documents, including that he had resigned, but said that he did work and his commission came to 2 million. That is all he's aware of that he took, and that he never paid any bribes or is unaware of any bribes that were paid to anybody or any MPs or any government officials for that matter. We will take a break here. We are very grateful to Professor H.K.C. Prempeh and Bright Simmons. Bright Simmons will take leave of us. Professor H.K.C. Prempeh will continue to stay with us as we ask questions about the lockdown lifted and the fight against coronavirus pandemic. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And as always, here on NewsFile, we put Ghana first. So Bright is still here with us. And joining us is Professor Abraham Kwabena Annan. He is director at Noguchi. So thank you very much, Prof, for making time to join us.
Thank you very much.
Right. So where does Ghana stand now as far as the coronavirus pandemic is concerned? So on your screens, you can see where we are now. Ghana's situation: confirmed cases 1,279. So meaning that our numbers have climbed up from the previous that you were aware of. We have had 10 deaths, 10 people have died, and 134 have recovered. 134 infected persons have recovered. And this is the breakdown. Upper West recorded 8, has recorded 8, Upper East 8, Northeast 2, and Northern 13. Ashanti 69, Eastern 56, Central 9, and Greater Accra 1,089. So the greatest number is in the Greater Accra. Western region 1, Volta region 10, and the Oti region has 13. So I will pose my very first question to Professor H.K.C. Prempeh so he can take leave of us. And Prof, I have been monitoring and I've discovered that you kept an open mind when the president lifted the measured lockdown. From that point, within a matter of 24 or 48 hours, you had taken progressive views and now come to a point where you suggested that there may not have been a point to continue to keep the lockdown going. But you have other concerns too about masks and so on. What do you say about the lockdown being lifted at a point when the numbers have risen?
Good. I mean, so the point that I made in that post that accompanied, that followed the president's announcement of the lifting of the lockdown is essentially that it didn't come to me as a surprise first. Right? People seemed surprised by that and a bit agitated by it. And I was making the point that if you look at even the lockdown from the beginning, we went for a fairly limited lockdown. We didn't go for a strict lockdown. We didn't go for a lockdown that was accompanied by a curfew. We allowed for quite a bit of movement to the extent that we kept municipal markets open and the like. that in and of itself should have told us that the political authorities, based on whatever advice that they have gotten or based on their own estimation, had a particular view of a lockdown. You know, that we as a country could not go for the India-style lockdown or the Wuhan-style lockdown. I'm not sure anybody can go for the Wuhan-style lockdown, and that this is what we could live with. So coming from that, and the fact that when it came time for the 2 week to elapse, we extended it by just 1 more week. And then we made good after that 1 week on basically on the expectation that it would be lifted. I was a bit, I didn't know why people were that surprised. You know, there is no science really to this, to when is an appropriate time to either impose or lift a lockdown. This is an evolving situation. Countries, there is a whole lot of variation in the country responses to COVID-19, if you look around the world. And I think in a sense that is helpful, because then we can also measure, at least after the fact, or sometimes even contemporaneously, which one is working and which one is not. There's been a lot of different country experiences and experimentation in this thing. And my view is that when you look at the Ghana lockdown, where in some parts, we didn't even seem to show a lot of resolve in actually enforcing it. It wasn't really even the limited one wasn't being enforced very strict, right? That is one. And our capacity to mitigate the social consequences was considerably weak. And we were not able to we've not been able to roll out the kind of social mitigation and economic mitigation measures that we had even promised. So when you look at all of that, then based on the information the government seemed to be giving us, I thought, well, what's the point to keeping this, right? What's the point to keeping this? Maybe what we should then do is move into a different mode and say, look, this is the path. Social, fiscal distancing, face masks, these kinds of things are the ones that we really need to do. Because if you look around the world so far, the tentative evolving evidence suggests that this is not the kind of, that behavior modification matters a lot in this matter. Right? Behavior modification by citizens actually is critical. And so I look at it and I say, well, it appears that the state has reached the limit of its capacity, at least in terms of enforcing a lockdown. So it should move into a different mode, which is continue to do the contact tracing, continue to do the testing, continue to do isolation, continue to do the treatment, and then we citizens then bear the rest of the burden of behavior modification, and that the two together with public education, enhanced public education, is what we really need to do. So I don't have an answer to whether or not the lockdown was lifted too soon. I don't know what another week would have accomplished.
All right.
I don't know 2 weeks would have accomplished.
Yeah.
I don't have a sense of the right time to lift a lockdown. But what the information driving the decision. So far, the only thing that I have been worried about is about the information. And I'm happy that this segment will look at the data management issues around our responses. I think that the information has been too aggregated at the national level. This requires a lot of behavior modification on our part. So we need a lot more disaggregated data on how the virus is behaving in our midst. We need to know where it is in terms of like hotspots, clusters. We need to have that kind of level of disaggregation, because it's about us. It's about our lives and our livelihoods and our risk to sickness and stuff like that. And those pieces of information, in my view, have not been easily forthcoming from government. We need to know these things. We also need to know, for example, the rate of infection. What's the R0, as the experts call it? What is R0? How many people is one single infected person infecting? What's the trend? Is it coming down or not? Without that, given the information that the government has given us so far, I saw no point to actually continuing the lockdown. But we need more granular information from the government about the epidemiology of this virus within our midst. I mean, it's really not just a pure science kind of conduct. If there's any science also, it's not just a hard science. It's a lot of social science here, a lot of sociology, a lot of politics, a lot of economics.
And as I follow you, Prof, I discover that you have been reading quite a lot on it. And so you are able to make, judgments that helps the discourse here in the country. My final question to you will be your concerns about mask wearing and it being made mandatory in the manner it's been made. If you can deal with that quickly for us.
No, I think one of my early responses after I posted that reaction to the president's lifting of the thing was, I was a bit surprised when I went out a day or two after I stepped out of the house, the day or two after, to discover again, a general very lax atmosphere. And I worried that because we had come to put almost all our eggs in this lockdown basket, the moment it was lifted, people may have actually read that to mean, hey, all bets are off now, we can resume our lives. And I think that is probably where we erred, that we should have accompanied, probably even before doing the lockdown, just sent a lot more signal about, real public education, reinforcing the other non-lockdown measures about physical distancing, about wearing of masks, and about these things. So I noticed that, basically we had gone back to this advice mode, which you talked about in your opening remarks, and that wasn't sufficient for me, that this is not just a matter of personal comfort or convenience, that to the extent that your acts or omissions as an individual could visit harm or injury on a third party, meaning myself and you, then this was a role for government, there was a place for government to step in with more regulation, a lot more diktat. And that's essentially the point that I took, that if indeed this is where we are now, we can leave our homes, but the risk is still there, then we need to take measures to mitigate those risks, like wearing the mask and doing these things. And so I was a bit alarmed that we had almost come back to like square one, where everybody was basically carrying about in public in the same fashion.
All right.
So but I agree with you. I'm happy that we are moving away from just advice and nudging to actually requiring this. But you are correct that the Rex press release does not constitute law, and that if we want to have legal bite behind these things, we must use the legal tools that have been given the government to actually do this properly.
All right.
Actually, whether it does it by bylaw, however it does it, it must have legal backing behind it.
All right.
So I am comfortable with the rules. We at CDD, even before the government announced, we had our meetings on how we are going to resume. For example, employers, I think, will have their own way of rolling out this. We have made our own decisions about how we are going to implement this in our office and the like. And I think we had taken an even more stringent approach to it than the government did. Right. So far, I'm fine. But what I'll say is that there's so much variation in the national responses. The facts are still evolving. The science is still very much in flux. And so there's a lot of learning that we're all doing almost in real time. I found a statement by the chief epidemiologist in Sweden quite interesting when he was asked about why they had taken such a lax approach to this that's different from all the other European countries, even the other Nordic nations. His response is an epidemiologist, right? His response was, well, there's no science here. I have looked around. Nobody can tell me the hard science that tells you what's the right thing to do, what's not the right thing to do. So, and our responses in Sweden are not, significantly worse than what we are finding in other countries. So it tells you that even within the science community, there is a lot of course, as you would expect, a disputation and an opinion as to how this is evolving. So I think more knowledge is what's important, but more information, more transparency from government. We are not children. We know how to handle information. We should be fed the information that government gets it, and make some of our own behavior modification decisions based on information we know.
Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, we are so exceedingly thankful that you made time to speak to us this morning. Thank you so very much, Prof.
Thank you. I can now enjoy listening to the rest of the show.
Thank you. Okay, so as you know, this show, as always, is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Consolidated Bank. We stand with you. MTN, everywhere you go. Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. Okay, so there's one other here that the FDA has issued a statement about, so I'm not too sure about that yet. Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. We lead, we build you a home. Enjoy learning. Keep learning, even in the pandemic. All you need is your Digibox, and you can have your children or your wards tune in to continue their schooling even in these times that they are out of school. Let's listen to the president, and then we will come to Prof here, Prof. Abraham, to help us to clearly understand the science that the president was talking about, as against what others say is such a gamble that the state has taken.
You are the very center of this battle, the doctors and the Association of Doctors in our country. So you are the very, very center of whatever has to be done to get the country going. I thought it was important for us to meet immediately after the decision we took last night to ease the restrictions on movements in our two greatest cities, Accra and Kumasi, and to get a bit of a flavor of how we're looking at going about this. Because at the end of the day, the decision has many, many, many ramifications. Economic, social, cultural, as well, of course, as its health dimensions. And what we are required to do as the decision makers is to balance all these factors and then come to a conclusion and a set of decisions that will best protect our people and, of course, protect the economy of our country. We take it that the medical initiatives we've taken, expanding our capacity to trace victims of this disease, being able to test them, being able to isolate and quarantine those who need to be so that we take them out of the population. And then, of course, the treatment. And then also looking at, if you like, the demography of the disease itself. How is it faring in Ghana in terms of sick, in terms of deaths? And all of those have been the basket of issues that has led us to take these decisions. We want the understanding of the medical profession as to the basis for which we are going forward. Because with your understanding, of course, then we are certain that the measures that are put in place will have the sympathetic treatment of those who matter. And that's really the reason why I brought you here, so that we can have a discussion and look at these measures.
So that was the president in a meeting with the medical people after he had lifted the lockdown and stressed that we needed to wear the mask when we are going into the public. Now, Prof, this is one issue that I made an observation the day after the announcement, or on Monday. The scientists, the professionals, the virologists that I have heard speak so eloquently about this situation and help educate people, I discovered that suddenly had a difficulty explaining the science that the president says backed this decision. Most of them could not say straightforward that the decision was a good one. What do you say?
Thank you very much. In actual fact, before we can have a good understanding of this science business, we have to ask ourselves some fundamental questions. What is science? If you don't answer that question, you will never answer it properly either. If you don't ask that question. You see, science is a very heterogeneous discipline. We have physical sciences, biological sciences, chemical sciences, natural sciences. Mathematics is a science.
Social sciences.
Social sciences. So you see, the challenge is when you begin to consider science as mathematics and only mathematics, you will definitely have a problem. In my view, from the understanding of science and basic disciplines, the president is 100% right. Because if you were to look at everything just in the context of social science, there's a lot to talk about as far as taking the decision is concerned. You see, now let's look at one thing that the president said: contact tracing. So we had COVID-19, which initially we didn't even see it in the country when we started testing. And Noguchi were at the forefront. And then later on we found that, look, COVID-19 is here, but it is imported cases. Then later on we found that, look, COVID-19 has entered the community and community transmission has started. You see? And then the president takes a decision, a leadership government decision, to lock down. Before lockdown, a lot of interactions are taking place. Even the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences has taken strategic moves and even met the president in the presidency. I was a member of the team that went. So many things have happened. Now, if you take even the mathematical science or the epidemiological science, take contact tracing. If you identify one person who is infected, potentially transmitting, and you do contact tracing, and you find that this person had had very, real contact with, let's say, 50 people, and you quarantine the 50 people, and then you look for whether any of them had acquired the infection, contracted the infection, and you find that out of that 50, maybe 0, or 1, or 2, it tells you something about the signs of transmission, what's happening, you see. And then the president did something else as a national government decision to also begin to do social, community screening, which was inputted by many, many stakeholders, including the Academy of Arts and Sciences. You see, so the community screening provides additional information on what is happening out there in the open community. And if you screen 100 people, and you were to find that 70 of them are infected, or you screen 100 people and you find that 2 are infected, or 1 is infected, it is science, it has meaning. And based on that meaning, you can take some decisions. Now, assuming you screen 100 people and found that 70 are infected, I believe it will be wise for you to lock down. Because if you don't lock down, the remaining 30 will soon be also infected. You have to lock down and manage the situation rigorously, more, intensively. But if only 1 is infected, then you weigh it against other, and the president said it, other social and economic factors. What is the average strength of the Ghanaian family in terms of standard of living, ability to even get food to eat. There are families that if they don't interact with externally for a day, 2, 3 days, they will not eat. They won't eat at all.
Yeah.
Maybe some people are in Ghana, they don't know what is poverty. I know what is poverty. I know it real, as personal experience when I was a child. So please, you don't joke with these things. Because eventually, if you really understand epidemiology and disease transmission and epidemics and pandemics, you will understand that, look, if you are not careful, depending on where your people, the majority of your people fall in even nutrition and what do you call it, balanced diets and deficiencies in diets, if you don't know and you are not careful, what you realize is that you will compromise the ability of people to be able to even withstand COVID-19 infection to the extent that even immunocompromisation will appear to be the case. That is why when HIV/AIDS came, you remember, it was a Becky Tambo, Becky, South African president. When he said that HIV/AIDS is not caused by any virus, but it's caused by poverty, is by nutritional. You understand? These things are intertwined. In today's science, in biomedical research science, we know that, look, nutrition and even immunology. So we talk of immunonutrition. So to say that there is no science really, it's because we have not defined what is science.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Well, Noguchi obviously has been doing such a big job, and people have been concerned that, you know, we ought to have paid a lot more attention to Noguchi long before today as they get overwhelmed. They also have been doing through what we are getting to know now, which is seeking to settle some of the doubts that people had, that they are doing the polling, you know, sampling, so to speak. And that explains the good numbers that they are doing. Now, right, the president banks his hopes on the fact that we are doing, among other things, advanced testing. Over the period, we have done only how many? Less than 80,000 so far. We are talking, and I keep referring, we are talking about real testing going on elsewhere. People are doing 10,000 a day. People are doing 20,000 a day. The US, for example, is seeking to do 5 million tests a day. How can we boast in what we are doing, which is so little?
Thank you. And I'll take my, I'll have my take on the president's issue, president's decision as well. But first of all, I have a few preliminary comments. I think I have to express great respect and gratitude to Noguchi and the very brilliant and valiant scientists there that are at the forefront of this fight. We have absolutely nothing but respect and gratitude for them. And
thank you.
They are all our heroes, absolutely. In the public health emergency, and here I agree with Professor Anand and Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, that you do need to be multidisciplinary in the way that you look at things. And you know, I was quite impressed when Noguchi and Warbrick announced the sequencing, the genome sequencing results, and everybody was praising the biomedical scientists that were involved. But you know, surprisingly, they'd forgotten the computing and the IT technicians who enabled the throughput, the high throughput sequencing that you need to actually get the results.
So obviously.
So it's a highly interdisciplinary area, and it's a big mistake when people think that there's some kind of hymn sheet of science that every expert has to sing from. In fact, in every sophisticated society, there are competing models. You have University College of London has a different way of looking at it. Imperial College has a different way of looking at it, because the variables are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Exactly. So in that respect, we should expect that there will be different views. And therefore, I was not surprised at all that we had people who were coming from different disciplines, pathology, because they were responsible for managing the case, and are concerned about risk in the wards and things like that, having a different view from epidemiology. That's beautiful. So I was shocked that in some of the comments, it appeared as if people thought that was some problem. We should expect this kind of robust engagement. The other thing that I also think is kind of important is that data, which is the point that Prof. Prempeh made so strongly, is critical. Data is critical because without data, an expert or a scientist is no different from you and I. The reason why they are more superior and why their views matter more is because often they have the right data and the skills to interpret that data. So data is very critical. And that is why I was a bit surprised about the decision by the president not
you need to take your time and adjust it well, unless you get it over the spectacles. Okay. Great. All right.
I was a bit, I don't know what to say, worried or anxious when the president, in announcing the removal, did not have the right team at the Ghana Health Service publish a more comprehensive analysis and say, here is the modeling that we're working with, so that the discrepancies in minor data issues that were creating some of the contests, which was more than a contest of ideas and was veering towards distrust and mistrust, will be abated. Let me give you a reason why, if you just look at the data as it's available. First of all, the data that is in the public domain, the general data, it's very difficult to use it for any kind of analysis. The one that they display, the media typically display. But there are situational reports, and in those situational reports, you can do some of the granular analysis that Professor Prempeh was talking about. So I have taken my time, with the help of Imani, to try and look at the Greater Accra data points very carefully and to try and see how it accords with the president's view. And I was impressed to learn that when you segregate the data along three major axes, if you take those that were sick and went to a hospital, or they called the hotline because they were sick and then there was a follow-up. So those have symptoms and have perhaps clinical manifestations. We call it routine surveillance. If you take that data, a range of data, you compare it against the community screening, where they set up perimeters and then they test randomly as much as they can, versus the enhanced contact tracing, where they are tracing primary and secondary contacts of people that were confirmed positive. There is significant variation in the positivity rates. And I think that is where the analysis should focus. So when you look at the routine surveillance as an example, that is people that are feeling sick, maybe they have flu-like symptoms, and then they go to hospital or they call, and then clinician does a preliminary diagnosis and then refer them for confirmatory testing. When you look at that segment, we are close to 9% positive rate, close to 9%. That's very significant. I'm talking Greater Accra. In the broader community screening, segment is less than 0.5% from the data that I'm looking at. It's a day old, and then when you look at enhanced contact tracing, it's close to 8%. What does this mean? A couple of things. One, it means that there is a possibility that how we design our community screening, using the spatiotemporal analysis of the data to figure out where should we go and do random tests, may not be as sensitive as the other categories, which is normal, right? Because if somebody is feeling sick, already there is a certain degree of suspicion, so it narrows it down more. And if you are just doing random testing. However, where you have a situation where your community screening is yielding very little, and yet for your enhanced contact tracing is yielding significant numbers, you have to start questioning the model in which you are doing your random sampling, your perimeter sampling. The second point that is interesting from the data is that when the president announced that he was going to lock down so that they can improve the quality of the tracing, we did see indeed from the data that the enhanced testing regime was indeed enhanced. So by the end of that week, they had as many as 5,318 contacts across Greater Accra region, of which almost 5,000, about 4,969 samples have been taken. And this was in 6th April, at the end of the first week. So the ramp up was very sudden, from about 600 contacts to about 5,000 and more contacts. So the data aligns with the president's statement then that we are locking down so we could do testing more effectively. The problem arises where by the time the president decided to unlock, tracing had declined to the point where we had, on 19th April, just a little above 2,000 contacts being traced. You understand my point? Just a little above 2,000 contacts being traced. And only a little above 1,000 samples being collected. Now, my argument would be that already, before the president announced the lockdown, there had been a step down in contact tracing and sampling. And therefore, an explanation is owed the public, whether that was based on a risk analysis that somehow we have a better handle of this problem, and therefore we don't need to trace as much and test as much. Or we have a resource problem, which some of us hear on the grapevine. And that is a very important point. In the absence of data, different experts, particularly those who have, different experts who look at this from different disciplines, and because the official data is not there, they are calling their friends in the laboratories and the rest of it, form a different opinion operating on half data. Because I can see an epidemiologist with good biostatistical background or bioinformatics background looking at data and saying that, well, the situation may look like it's not that bad for 3 reasons. You are tracing less towards the end of the lockdown period, and you are sampling less. So perhaps given that situation, the impression that is being created at the level of the highest levels of government is somewhat rosier than it should be. Another person will say, look, we have a surveillance challenge in this country. We have a weakness in our surveillance system, both our passive and our active surveillance systems in this country, because we know that in 2017, our surveillance, routine surveillance, failed us in the H1N1 outbreak in Ghana, as you remember, in Kumasi, where 4 young students in Kumaka died. It was an autopsy which revealed that they had died of H1N1. Now, if you have such a situation, you have such a historical, such historical evidence on hand, that there may be weaknesses in surveillance, even for influenza, where we have a national influenza center, very advanced system, sentinel sites all over the place, then it is possible that given the limited amount of enhanced contact tracing that was being done toward the tail end, some of the active case search results were not fully representative of the true situation on the ground. So what is the solution to this? Much more data, much more insight into the analysis, much more data, much more insight into the analysis and the model building that enables the decision to be taken whether we are seeing a decline or a rise in prevalence and incidence. The other thing that I also observed from the data was that the epidemic has moved into high density areas. So we've always known that Ayawaso West, and Ayawaso East are major hotspots. But in a few days, Ayawaso Central, which has some of the highest spatial densities in this country, so I'm talking about Mamobi, Nima, Kanda area, have started to shoot up very dramatically. But even worse than that, the socioeconomic links between that part of the city and Accra Central is very interesting, because you're not only looking at the static picture, but also you are looking at the evolving picture. And if you look at the links between that part of town to people that work in Tudu, people that work in other parts of Koleklote, which I'll come to, and Accra Central, particularly that Macaulay area, Jamestown, etc., etc. And you find out that there's covariance. So when we did the data analysis, we find out that when this is moving, it's moving in tandem with movement in case detection in another part of the country where there's strong socioeconomic links. It gives us an insight into why the Koleklote problem was not detected early. Remember when they said we're going to do randomized testing and intensify it in Ayawaso? They did not add Koleklote. And yet, in a very short period of time, Koleklote now is a major hotspot, outstripping Ayawaso.
So what I'll do is that we will take a break, and when we return, we'll have Professor Anand respond to the very interesting, analysis that have questions in them that you have just done. So we take a break now. We will be right back. You're welcome back. This is NewsFile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And as you know, here on NewsFile, we put Ghana first. I'll take a couple of your messages, and then I'll get to Professor Anand to assist us, break down just a bit of what Bright Simmons' very intriguing path that he took us. And then we'll continue with the questions of the mistrust in the data that is being churned out. Dr. Charles Rekubrobe says that perhaps those recommending that we wear a mask do not wish to follow their own advice, which is why the reluctance to back it by law. Also, Edu Jemfi says Ghana is where she is because of kickbacks, middlemen, and lack of legal fiber to enforce laws and to conduct prosecution. So that should be about the bribery scandal at Tor that we spoke about. Also, lawyer Yao D. Opong says anyone who suggests that Ghana may have to hold on with any criminal investigation until the civil suit in the US is determined should not give the impression that they are unaware of the established law that even in Ghana, both civil and criminal cases can be pending at the same time on the same facts. Again, the special prosecutor, as has been articulated, does not need a reference to be made to him before that office can commence investigations. So some of your comments there. Okay, then just a couple more. Eugene Kuniba says, it seems the OSP is aware his removal is imminent, so he has given up on the work already. It's not easy to remove the OSPO. The president cannot remove the OSP at his whim. It has to go through a very laborious, difficult process like you see happening to SHRAG bosses, EC bosses, NCC bosses, and Superior Court judges. A.U. Farouk in Tamale says that I urge government to provide face masks to the public before making it compulsory. Most Ghanaians cannot afford the PPEs due to the current situation. Then Kwekutre says, independent minds and intelligent guys, if you say Bright and Prempe are not fit, then please call for COVID-19 tests because you just came from China. All right, that's a different debate that some people decide to have. Now, Prof, let's get to very. I didn't anticipate that Bright perhaps will even have the capacity to get into this situation, the manner he went about it,
yes,
and using the examples from Koleklote and all of that, seeking to suggest that it may be a gamble to remove the lockdown.
Yes, thank you. Honestly, the Bright's analysis is very impressive. And that is part of how society is supposed to move. You should get different inputs, different impressions, different emphasis from different places and people. But I'll make some general comments. You know, in dealing with especially global health emergencies, the world has gotten into, or is getting into, new arenas. So in biomedical sciences, for example, we talk about emerging and re-emerging diseases or infections. So some are re-emerging in the sense that we know them and they come up in a different way, or like Ebola in West Africa, we had never had it before, and then it just came up like that. But then we have also emerging diseases like COVID-19. You didn't even know it at all. It's just come, it's introduced itself. So when you are also dealing with the response and control, the issues that Bright raised are very important, because diseases generally have characteristics. In Ghana, we have so many endemic diseases, and many a times they show us certain very interesting characteristics. Sometimes it's simple to understand, sometimes it's not that simple. Take a disease like bilharzia, blood in urine. We know that it is widespread in Ghana, but we also know that it is very focal in distribution. You find it in clusters in certain places, simply because of the way it's transmitted. Because it requires water and a vector, a snail vector. But then, if you come to a disease like COVID-19, we all see it as a pandemic, and we see it like a disease that is affecting a whole nation. But when you go deeper into the analysis and looking at it from the point of view of very expert epidemiology, you may make discoveries and then have even new strategies of dealing with it. And that is the direction that Bright has led us to, which is very, very good. Because the point about high density areas. Now, when you say lockdown, you know, you have to be very careful about what it means, because you have a society, a community. You have the demographic, you know, profiling is there. However, there is culture and sociology, and there is the way the community members, they live. So if you go to America or any of the developed countries and you do a lockdown, and virtually 90% of the community may be spread out beautifully in houses and homes. Now you come here and you find that in the high density areas, you would have locked down, but you have locked down clusters of people who, those clusters themselves require to be locked down. And that is the point. So that's the point Bright made.
Listening to you, the decision is based more on science, not quasi-science, but say social, economic, you know, reasons.
Cultural.
The WHO has even warned that in Africa, it does appear if we are not careful with lockdowns, it is starvation and hunger that will kill our people more than coronavirus. Yes. Some governments are becoming unpopular now. Ramaphosa is not being enjoyed by South Africans who need food parcels, because they queue, and for sometimes over 8 hours no food is coming. Yes. For sometimes it doesn't come at all. So if you extend it also as a government, you are looking at a situation where you might be faced with getting unpopular rather than the normal situation where presidents and governments have taken advantage of this situation to boost their ratings and popularity.
Yeah. So in reality, you see, the point you have made is very important. I'll come back to what I was saying. You see, when you look at the world today and you ask the question, health, what is health? It is both physical and psychological well-being. You see, many a times we are looking at it only in terms of the physical, the bodily health. There's infection, there's no infection. But the psychological can be even more serious sometimes than the physical, you see. And that is health, you see. So the point that Bright made is something that you know, should be taken further on in terms of Ghana's response to COVID-19. That in these high-density areas, we are beginning to see something, but we have to understand the phenomenon. You see, look at the way our households, family households are constructed. Sometimes we even call them, the places where individual families are living, we call them family houses. You see, it is a cluster by itself. So if we, let's say we impose lockdown, and these clusters are left untouched, no other issues concerning those clusters, and there is even one person infected in a cluster, you may end up by the end of about a few weeks, every member of the cluster becoming infected. Okay. You see, so that is the part of the issue, and I'm happy that he brings it up. So it requires certain decisions and actions to be taken, so that we can get out of it.
Let's now listen to this explanation about the polling, and then return to you on the questions of polling and testing, testing and polling. Let's listen. Our own, you know, journalists have been to speak to, you know, laboratory scientists or virologists, veterinary. In this, Latif Idris has gone to speak to some of them, and we have this explanation to share with you.
The VSD.
Yes, the VSD.
In for other coronaviruses through some PREDICT project and others. But with this pandemic, we started testing from 28th of March, where we received the first RNA extract from Noguchi. So usually when we get a sample, and the sample comes in here, we have our team, the team of doctors and technicians who work together to do the sorting. Sorting usually means that we compare the sample ID with the sample container to do matching. Each container comes with this document. Okay. So they have to make sure that every container is having a document attached to it. That is what
so this document has the name of the
individual.
Okay, that we don't want to show because of
so it has the name of the individual and where the sample is coming with a specific sample ID. Okay. So this will accompany the sample sent by Noguchi to our facility here at VSD. Okay. And when it comes here, our team, like as you can see from there, are doing the sorting. So you can focus on them and see they are doing the sorting. So they sort the sample up to know that the number of samples tallies with the paperwork that comes with it. We have the samples coming in the container. They have already pulled the sample and we spray around it. I mean,
okay, so this is the pooling that we've been hearing about?
This is the pooling sample. So these are 10 samples pulled together. So we'll do the extraction of this RNA. So this is a pool sample that we've been hearing about. So we have this sample, we have added everything in and pulled this sample together as one sample. Okay. So when we run this sample and it becomes positive, now we have to go back to identify the individual sample to know which individual is positive among this pool sample. That is all the pool we are talking about.
So this is what you have as a container?
Yes.
And then you put it in...
Yeah, so we put this one into an Eppendorf tube. Okay. You can see from there, they have collected a sample into an Eppendorf tube or cryovirus and give it a special ID. So as you can see, they are adding normal saline to the tubes and collect the sample in a pool into one small vial called Eppendorf tube or cryovirus. And that sample will be sent to the BSL-3 laboratory for the RNA.
Right. Prof, help us understand better.
Yes.
What is this, polling all about?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and it's good for people to understand it. Let me explain it simply this way. You see, when you have a pandemic like COVID-19, and everybody is concerned, and it is spreading, and you don't know where it is, and you are testing for it, okay, you would want to quickly identify people who are infected so that you can feed the data into the analysis that the epidemiologists, the statisticians, what Bright is bringing out so clearly, you see. Now, you look at your testing capacity, and this is very good I'm saying this. Earlier on, some weeks to months back, I spoke to the media. I was asked the question, what is Noguchi's testing capacity in terms of ability to, number of samples to analyze in a day? I said, it's about 1,000, 1,200, 1,500.
Excuse me, quick question. Have you stopped screening for all the other programs that use the RT-PCR and dedicated everything to COVID?
We have stopped everything and dedicated everything to COVID. You see, a good question. So you see, so some people have heard that. So you said that your capacity is 1,200, 1,000, let's say 500. Now, how come now you said now your capacity is 5,000? So let me explain it. You see, in normal times, at the beginning, we were testing 10, 50, 20. Our maximum is 100, But as things are changing, the University of Ghana Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, we have a mandate. And you have to understand our mandate to understand how we work. Our mandate is so clear that we should conduct, novel research into infectious and non-infectious diseases. Our second mandate is to build capacity. Capacity especially through training, especially training the next generation of scientists, and also training health professionals. You see, that's the second. The third mandate of Noguchi is to provide specialized diagnostics and monitoring services, surveillance, you see. So Noguchi is a biomedical research institute of global, standard, high standard. We are expected to develop new diagnostics, and we have the capacity to do that. So when we started testing COVID-19, and we take one sample and put into one, slot for RT-PCR. And then we realized that, look, we are now being confronted with the escalated, sample, testing, the enhanced testing. What does our professional competence tell us or direct us to do? Where is the innovation which still puts us in excellence without compromising? That is where we looked at the analysis of samples by pooling. By pooling, what it means is this. You take 10 samples. You take a little bit of each into only one tube. Now, into that one tube, you have a little bit of each. But the question is, if you test this tube, should only one of these be positive? Will you pick it? So we did those, analysis and standardization to ensure that using known positives, to ensure that as little as it is there will be picked positive. Wonderful. Now then we become very happy and strong because we have realized one thing already. Science is observation, analysis, and critical, foresight and movement. That's what science is. So we were happy for one reason, that majority of samples we are testing turn out to be negative. So if we take 10 and then we test test it like I've explained. And the testing will go with positive and negative controls anyway. So we'll check our positive control and negative control if they are working. And then if the sample comes out to be negative, because we've done the robust analysis and the standardization, we know that these 10 samples are negative.
Okay.
You see, we don't have to be by force always testing one at a time. No. Science and research and development and innovation, it's not like that.
And necessity is a
matter of invention. Now, do you know this thing that I've just explained, the meaning, you won't believe it. Previously, if we took 100 samples and we tested, it's 100, isn't it? Now, if we do the pools of 10 and we test 100, we have tested 1,000 people. Have you seen the difference?
Right.
So, I said that our capacity was 1,200. And I'm saying again
but is it a foolproof that there is no chance of compromise if you put 10 bits of 10 samples together and you test them at a go?
Very good.
It is not possible that you may have a positive in 9 negatives that will not show up.
That is why we did the robust analysis to standardize a test. We don't just do it because we want to do it.
Okay.
We did it with clear protocol, using known positives, and because the known positives, we can even reduce the amount of viral RNA in the positive. We even reduce the amount of viral RNA, even in the positive that we are adding to the remaining 9 to make 10.
Right.
And then still take portions of even the one that has been reduced. And then we found that our system could pick it.
All right.
So if you can pick it, what is the problem? We don't have a problem. That is science. So then we moved on. So when we say we pool, that is the meaning. But let me tell you something. This pooling thing is wonderful and good for us. But we need to be extremely careful in the future. And that is why it is very important that we saw what the VSD, Noguchi, building capacity. That's our second mandate, build capacity of health professionals. You see, something can happen if we are not careful to control the spread of COVID-19 in Ghana. And the number of positivity goes up. If it goes up, to the extent that if you take, let's say, 100 samples, maybe about 30 are positive, we can't pool anymore. Because almost every 10 that you take from 100 will have at least a positive.
Okay.
Because whenever you get a positive test, you now have to disaggregate.
Okay.
And disaggregation is not disaggregation. You now have to go and test the individual samples
from which you took the
which you got a positive.
Okay.
Are you seeing?
Okay.
So we have to be extremely careful for the future, not to let this, COVID-19 continue to spread to a point that.
So let's get to know a bit more of some specifics. And like you guys have done, and I think you deserve all the praise for this innovation. Of course, the world is innovating as COVID-19 is forcing us to. Even the use of ventilators.
Yes.
Now they are doing split use. One ventilator is being used for as many as 4 people, and that wasn't the case normally. Right. So when we deal with the specifics, we want to know the number of samples that you may have dealt with so far, the number of samples you have processed,
So at Noguchi, as at yesterday, we had tested a total of, we had actually processed a total of 80,273. And we had tested 75,687. And of course, we know the positivity and things like that, the number of positives and things. So that was the broad picture. And of course, the government figures that it brings is not just Noguchi figures. It is adding KCCR. Now, Noguchi, we have trained the veterinary, VSD. Theirs will be added. We have also trained, National Public Health Reference Laboratory. Theirs also will be added. We've also trained CSIR. That one too will be added. So the picture brought by the government arranged system is the global one. And if you compare it directly with that of Noguchi, you end up now having people becoming confused. And that has to be done very cautiously. Okay.
What sorts of samples are you collecting? Throat swabs, sputum, stool?
Okay.
And what's the advantages and disadvantages in either of these?
Again, you see, when you mention the ventilators, some few weeks or months back, if you made a suggestion that one ventilator will be used for 2 people, even just 2 at the same time, medical professionals will tell you that you are mad. There's something wrong with you. Because there could be cross-infection. But as you yourself, you said, necessity is the mother of invention. Now that we realize that if we use one ventilator on one person, 3 people will die, we find a way of using it on 4 people without cross-infection, because the concern is cross-infection. I hope you get it. Yeah. And we have already mechanisms and measures that we can use to avoid cross-infection. We have so many filters, different kinds, different types. There are filters we call HEPA filters that no pathogen can pass through at all, and it's already there and we know. So you can prevent the cross-infection. Therefore, you can do that. Now let's come back to the testing. The standard testing for COVID-19 required the use of the swabs.
Nasopharyngeal?
Nasopharyngeal, using through the nose for the back of the throat, and also through the mouth, also for in the close to the, better inside. Now, when you take these swabs into the collect the samples, they are designed, they are not cotton swabs that are just brushed like, they are specially designed, and they will pick mucus from the linings of the nasopharyngeal, esophagus, name it what. It will pick, mucus from there. And because of the nature of this infection, if you just brush a little bit of mucus, you are picking millions of viral cells, which is too much even for what we need for testing. So that's how come the test standard-wise is done. However, it got to a point that globally, there were no swabs. You can't get a swab to buy. The whole world. So do we fold our hands and say that, okay, no swabs, we can't test anymore? Or we will do exploration to see whether we can have alternatives. So what we did was then to again do operational research within program research, operational, and take the few swabs that we have which are available, use them alongside another type of sample collection that we already know. We have tuberculosis already in Ghana. We collect sputum always for tuberculosis. So what about collecting, because we want something from in there. What about collecting the sample as if we are going to do tuberculosis, examination or testing? And then let's check and see whether the swab and that kind of sample, what will it tell us? What will it give us? And that investigation showed that, look, the person who is positive by swab is positive by sputum. The one who is negative is negative. So, you see, this is life. This world, I used to be the president of the Ghana Red Cross Society. We talk of first aid. One of the most important rules about first aid is that whenever you have to save life, you must be trained to the extent that you can use the materials that are available to save the life. Not that you say that, oh, I don't have a stretcher. You don't have a stretcher. What do you mean you don't have a stretcher? You can make a stretcher with shirts and sticks. I hope you get the point. Yes, that is what science is. And that is what we do. We have to do it because we are supposed to be creative and create science ourselves and introduce new methods and approaches. So it is important for the public to understand what is the University of Ghana Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, and understand that we can do new things and introduce new concepts.
Good. So some people are interested in knowing whether even with the innovation that you have introduced, you still are challenged in a way or the other. We have discovered suddenly that there are quite a number of institutions in Ghana who can do some of these testing, except that, we didn't plan about them, the nature in which we neglect our health institutions, leave them in a state that they are unable to do as much. Yet this situation is forcing them to do a lot. For the first time, I'm getting to know about the National Public Health and Reference Laboratory, all of them doing some of these things. What challenges are you facing by way of the capacity questions?
Okay, so let me talk to the innovation and challenge, and then I'll come to that. So as you introduce innovation, of course, you introduce also new challenges or problems. One of the challenges that we have encountered, which is not a difficult thing to deal with, is where you collect the sputum, and the sputum is put in a container like you saw the VSD, and sometimes some people who are packaging the sample are not capping the container well and can allow a leakage. But unfortunately, anytime there is a leakage, any other sample together with that leakage cannot be tested or analyzed, because we cannot tell whether the leakage contamination has taken place, you see. So that is one challenge. Now, apart from that, you find that it goes fairly smoothly. Okay. And then the second part of your question, can you repeat that for me? So the second part, yes. So
I was just seeking to know what are some of the challenges that you would face, you're currently facing.
In terms of the capacity building.
Yes, and you have made us also know that you are supposed to also help all the other institutions, as it were. And we are getting to know that there are pockets of these institutions around the country, but they just have been neglected. And I mentioned the National Public Health and Reference Laboratory, for example, who are also doing some of these, but what's the capacity? How much can they do? What help can they get so you can free up Noguchi and KCCR?
So some of the very interesting capacity challenges we have had is, first of all, certification. Before any other unit can join the COVID testing, we should be able to certify the personnel who are doing the testing, and also the facilities they are going to use to do the testing. So training, going to the site and training the people there is okay. But to certify, you need to have more information to be able to be sure that I guarantee that this person will do an excellent job. One thing we have done as far as that is concerned is that people who will do the analysis in the various units, we let them come to Noguchi to work with us for a period of time as part of the training. So they also see what happens at Noguchi and have first-hand, experience. And so that one has helped us to overcome that. The other second very interesting but unique challenge is that if you come to Noguchi, University of Ghana, Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, and you see the way we work and the way we are set up, we are expected and obliged to meet international standards. So there is something called Quality Management System, QMS. And then other, you know, accreditation, good laboratory practice, ISO and things like that. QMS, for example, is so critically important because to handle samples like COVID-19 has so many biosafety issues. Even the laboratory scientists, the personnel working on the testing themselves can be exposed through unintended, you know, release, or name it what. And so it is so important that even the unit that is going to join the testing meets a certain criteria. And sometimes you may find that there are so many other units who could have joined, but they cannot because they will not meet the quality criteria.
Okay.
So one of the other things we should do, which WHO has already started, you know, building the capacity of laboratories to be able to meet quality standards. It's a very important thing generally for laboratories in Ghana. And there are so many laboratories who don't meet standards, especially some of the private ones. You see.
All right.
Things like that.
On this note, we will take our very final break, and when we return, we will hear from Bright Simmons. And there's, is it a question from Charles Rekubrobe? He says that, can Bright Simmons use that big brain to build a unique Ghana COVID-19 model using the real data he has so brilliantly dissected, so we don't have to be scared by the output of whose hypothetical approach? We'll be right back and we'll hear from Bright. Yeah, welcome back. This is NewsFile, it's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And I'd like to first apologize to those of you. Last week we did give an indication that we might be looking at other subjects, including particularly the legal questions that arise as regards people that are losing their jobs in the hundreds and thousands. In America already, in 5 weeks, over 26 million people have lost their jobs and they are filing for unemployment benefit. Ghana, you can't file anything for anywhere. People are getting terminated, losing their jobs. People are sitting at home and they are thinking, well, what will I do after this? People are getting jailed for 4 years, which is the minimum, for not stealing, but going to a church to pray. And some just walking out of their homes because they are not familiar with the rules and regulations that are being issued all the time. I'm sorry about that, but guess what? Multimedia will reach out to you directly and give you the legal advice that you require. Starting tomorrow, Sunday at 2 p.m., I will be hosting COVID and the Law, and we'll deal with everything you need to know about the law and also to help you more particularly in these trying times. So join me, and I'll have a colleague of mine also to join to give you platinum legal advice for free. COVID and the Law is on your JoyNews channel, this very channel, tomorrow, Sunday, 2 p.m. Thank you. So, Bright, I don't know if you have followed, I know you have, the polling method. There are some who have some doubts about it and so on. What do you know? What can you share? How can we rely on it?
Before I I go to that subject, I just wanted to re-emphasize the biosurveillance point in those high-density areas. But the argument we are making is that it's not just food you have to give it to you have to send it to these places. Right. Sanitary facilities, mobile toilets, these are critical interventions that must happen. So in case that wasn't clear, I wanted to make that clear. And Prof is absolutely right. The whole point of innovation is to continuously react to constraints. And it is true that when it comes to group testing and pool testing, we have data dating back to 1943. What is fascinating, I keep talking about this multidisciplinary thing being the only way to understand the world, is that when pool testing and the first protocols and algorithms were designed, it was actually in the annals of mathematical analysis by Robert Duffman and about a decade later, Sterrett. And it was basically how you do that without get into a situation where you are underestimating the false negatives, which is what Prof mentioned. And I agree completely that when the positivity in the population starts to go up, you need to start reviewing whether that protocol makes sense. And that is why I shared with you, if you recall, at the beginning of the program, the Indian Council for Medical Research study on pool sampling.
Right.
And it's the only one that I've seen that a national authority has done it, with all the ethical approvals, so the Institutional Research Board of the council, as well as the Indian hospital that conducted the study, the King George Medical University. The one that I have seen, which is nationally now in place to guide how you do pool sampling, reinforces the point that was just made, which is if you start to see the positivity rates going up, you need to start to review that protocol, which then raises the question, this very interesting question. We have 3 major cohorts. We have the one that is through community screening, where positivity is very low. We have the one that is, I told you earlier, enhanced tracing, and also routine surveillance, where positivity is very high, above 8% and 8.5%. If you saw in the document, we were recommending a threshold of 2%. I think that it may be reasonable to have pool testing only for community screening, as was done in San Francisco by Professor Pinsky and other guys from Stanford, where they said, look, they were actually using a threshold of 1% positivity. And they said for mass screening, pool sampling makes a lot of sense. It saves reagents, it saves capacity.
But they recommend that you poll 5, and they discourage doing more than 5.
That's
we are doing
India,
10.
That's the India recommendation.
Yes, I read from what you shared.
The Stanford recommendation goes up to 10 as well.
Okay.
And I've seen studies that suggest that even up to 32, you can still maintain diagnostic sensitivity.
Okay.
The issue though is you have to understand what you are doing. And there are 3 issues. One is that when the positivity rate starts to go up, it's not only the operational challenges that you get, but the risk of false negatives also become higher. And that is why that recommendation I'm making, that we should separate the community screening, where the positivity rate is low, from the enhanced tracing and the other group, where the positivity is high, also for clinical reasons. If you have a pooled sample in the well, and it comes back negative, you still do not have the differential diagnosis information regarding the individuals in that negative pool. You get me? So because there are a lot of respiratory pathogens. And if you are using this for clinical, it's not just for public health surveillance. There are clinical implications for those in routine surveillance and enhanced tracing. They may be sick. So if you want to go back to their clinician, whoever did the referral, and say, look, we did a test, it's negative for beta coronaviruses, but maybe there are other viruses you need to be aware of, influenza A and the rest. You cannot do that if the protocol maintains a pool sampling. So that requires, therefore, that we separate the 3 cohorts and use pool sampling for the community screening, which everybody is beginning to think through. All the literature that I've seen suggests that for community screening is really interesting. But when it comes to areas where there are clinical implications like the routine surveillance and the enhanced tracing, I think that we need to separate those out. The second quick point that I think we need to make
is that
you
may make that in 30 seconds.
Well, the government needs to invest more.
All right.
Because when we were first told that we're doing a lot of testing, the politicians took all the credit. And they made it look as if it was because they have invested more in machines and reagents. What Prof has done is explain to us that it's through the innovation that they have done that they've managed to raise capacity, not investments in reagents and computing power and the likes of it. So the government needs to now go back, reinvest again in buying this equipment, and ensure that we are doing the right thing.
Thank you. Prof, what will be your final word in 30 seconds to, sorry, we have run out of time.
My final wording is that we need to be able to manage the COVID-19 situation, and it's very important that every individual, especially the public, respects the preventive measures. The physical distancing, the use of the nose masks, the washing of hands, do not touch your face, things like that.
All right.
And also people should stay at home whenever they don't have to do anything outside.
Thank you all very much. My guests have been Professor Abraham Kwabena Annan, a director of the Noguchi Medical Research Institute. Bright Simmons is board member, Africa Population and Health Research Center. And earlier we had Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, executive director of the CDD, joining us. I'm Samson Ladia Yanini. Have a good afternoon.
Wonderful.